A pastor confessed to a 12-year affair and called it a struggle. His church is calling it a road to redemption, but the woman he was involved with came out first, 8 months before he said one word.
And eventually just completely giving myself over to this affair with my spiritual father and pastor, where I had also helped build this church for 13 years.
Did you have an affair?
I had an affair. I had an affair. I don't think that is without question. I had an affair. I stepped out on my wife.
If he had not been exposed, would he have ever told the truth? And what does it mean when a man's repentance only starts after he gets caught and then turns it into a ticketed one-man show? I'm asking you to hear this all the way through. There is more here than the headline. Welcome back to Family Still Matters. I'm Deborah. If you have sown time and your money and trust into a ministry and then discover your pastor was living a double life the entire time, you know that wound goes deeper than disappointment. It shakes your faith and your ability to trust spiritual leadership again. Here's what I want you to walk away with today. A clear-eyed framework for knowing the difference between a pastor who is genuinely repenting and a pastor who is monetizing his mess, and what real restoration must require before any fallen leader returns to a pulpit. Because 12 years is not a stumble. 12 years without exposure means 12 years it would have continued. She was 18 years old, new to the faith, carrying unresolved wounds from her relationship with her father, and introduced to a pastor who told her God had placed significant gifts and calling inside her. That is not how an affair starts. That is how grooming starts. It began with access, repeated private meetings framed as mentorship, personal conversations presented as pastoral care. Each step appeared appropriate. Each step pushed the boundary further than the last. Then came the prophetic investment declarations about her calling and her future in the ministry. For a young woman carrying a father wound, that kind of focused attention does not just feel like encouragement. It feels like divine confirmation. And when those words are used as currency to blur appropriate lines, the confusion that follows is not a character flaw in her. It is the intended result by him. She raised concerns early. They were minimized. She attempted to distance herself multiple times. Each time she tried to step back, he responded with pressure, withholding pastoral support, and using his spiritual authority as leverage to maintain the connection rather than releasing it. Outside counsel, therapy, extended periods of no contact, none of it produced a permanent break until outside exposure forced the end that neither of them had been able to bring about independently. A man genuinely convicted of his own sin moves to protect other people or other persons involved. He creates separation at personal cost. This man did the opposite. Repeatedly across years, he could not tolerate losing his hold on someone he had made dependent upon him. That is a sustained, permanent control operating beneath the cover of spiritual authority. And recognizing it is the first step toward protecting the next young woman who walks through those church doors with her whole heart toward God, unsuspected. He sat down for a public interview, acknowledged the affair, and framed the exposure as an act of God on his behalf. But repentance is not only what you acknowledge, it is equally defined by what you leave out. He never acknowledged he performed the wedding ceremony for the woman he was involved with and the man he considered his spiritual son. He officiated that marriage, then continued the involvement while she was married under his own spiritual covering. That fact appears nowhere in his public account. He described the origin as something that developed organically between two people in close proximity. Her account describes intentional recruitment, repeated private access, and personal conversations initiated with a teenager who had no framework for recognizing where pastoral boundaries should have been. These are not variations of the same story. They are fundamentally different stories. When pressed about whether he would have come forward without outside exposure, he acknowledged he genuinely could not say that he would have. And believe it or not, that is the most honest moment in the entire interview. And I have to say it was a great interview. The interviewer pressed hard, but that was the most honest statement, the one and only honest statement that she got out of that interview. And it is surrounded by theological framing and childhood history that functions to redirect attention toward his internal experience rather than toward his impact on other people. Now, the one-man show, while she was reaching out to church leadership and receiving no response for a full month, he was in production on a ticketed theatrical performance about his experience. He charged admission. He built a paying audience for his narrative. His wife did not attend. He acknowledged she was not emotionally ready to sit in that room, and he proceeded anyway. The woman he made vows to was not ready to hear this account. The woman most directly damaged had never once been invited to an accountability conversation. And he was on a stage telling his version, controlled, packaged, and sold. That is not the posture of a man undone by genuine remorse. That is a man who has repositioned himself as a central figure in a story that devastated multiple other people. Accountability that extends only as far as you manage the narrative is not accountability. It is reputation recovery with a production budget. I'll say that again. It is reputation recovery with a production budget. Grace is real. Repentance is real. But restoration is a process with requirements that cannot be bypassed. Complete truth must be on the table. People most directly harmed must have a voice before restoration planning moves forward. She contacted the board. A full month passed, no response. His return was already being planned. That's not restoration. That is institutional protection, dressed up in the language of grace. A higher standard for ministry leadership exists for a specific reason. The position creates a profound imbalance of power. When one person simultaneously holds the role of spiritual father, marriage counselor, wedding officiant, the prophetic voice over another person's calling, that is not simply a man with a personal struggle. That is a comprehensive system of influence that caused harm and must be fully examined before it is return to active use. Genuine repentance and narcissistic self-focus cannot coexist. True repentance requires remaining present in the full weight of what your choices cost other people, without redirecting towards your own losses. His public account includes extensive reflection on what he lost. It includes very little reflection on what she lost, what her former husband lost, what his own wife lost during years she did not know what was happening inside of her own marriage. And personal history, however real, cannot be offered as a mitigation frame for what was done to someone else. She arrived at that ministry at 18 years old looking for genuine spiritual covering. She became the person who absorbed the consequences of wounds that existed long before she walked through those doors. Real restoration builds the environment, not just the individual. It cannot happen through a curated narrative. It cannot happen while the most affected party remains unheard. And it cannot happen from a stage with a ticket price at the door. On this channel, we talk about family, faith, and real issues impacting our homes and our churches, because family still matters. And that includes protecting people inside those walls and not just the leaders standing in front of them. If this conversation stirred something in you, please leave a thoughtful comment below. Again, I'm Deborah. This is Family Still Matters. Before a shepherd returns to the flock, the sheep he wounded must be heard. That is not punishment, that is accountability. And without it, it is not restoration. It is just a better produced version of the same deception. And that matters too. May God continue to richly bless you.